company actually increases job performance by 56%.
It's like a lot of times all of that 3D data is there. They've done the work, they've done the engineering, they've done the slopes, they've done all the 3D polylines are already in their file. There's just a huge disconnect between what they do and the builders right now.
113,000 available unfilled construction jobs in this country, 11 million available unfilled jobs overall in this country.
One of the great culture things I see in construction is people just get it done. At the end of the day, we've built 100% of the building. There's no 80-20 rule.
Think of the technology that has been brought into existence in the last 60 years, and you think of the productivity gains that have, say, occurred in agriculture, which is up 1,750%, or manufacturing, which is up 400%, and construction is flat to negative.
This was always supposed to just be a 6-episode mini-series, Stacy. I want to remind you of that.
Good morning. It's huddle time.
Good morning, everyone.
Stacy, it's so good of you to join us. Last week, I guess you just kind of were like, peace. I'm not doing this today.
I'm so sorry to keep you hanging.
So, no, it's all the beach time. It's fine. You got other stuff going on. I see it.
Yeah. So last week, last minute, well, I had been sick for like a month, upper respiratory infection. And then I was on some medication that was giving me so many bizarre side effects and we could not figure it out. Really? And then I was literally in urgent care the night before we left for vacation. I was like, you need to figure this out now because I planned this vacation. So I finally made it. They figured it out. Getting better, but I mean, this beautiful view. We're in Ocean City right now. So.
And I see you have a couple of stuffed animals enjoying that.
Yes,
view.
My son set them up for you guys.
That's awesome.
They're right out on the beach over there, just, looking at the waves and everything. It's really nice.
So cool. Ocean City, Maryland.
Yeah. But I did miss out on, embarrassing you and asking you a lot of personal questions. So we're going to have to do a redo.
No time like the present, Stace. You can always just jump in and have fun with me. I'm an easy target. All right. So I'm gonna pull on our guest today. Today we are fortunate enough to have Scott Peper. Scott is joining us from Mobilization Funding. Scott does funding packages for contractors, and we can see this sign in his background that actually says construction MFers. I got to know what that's about. Scott, thank you for joining us. Tell us that story. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys. Hey, Stacy. Hey, Chad. Good seeing both of you guys again.
Yeah.
So I don't know where to start with that one, but MF is obviously our logo. So Mobilization Funding, we had the MF logo. And then over the years, early on, it got cut to MF, just like anything. Just like my last name starts out as Peper, it became Peeps. And then there's a litany of things I've been called with that last name, as you can only imagine. But Mobilization Funding, I thought was pretty standard, particularly for construction. I thought everybody knew what that is, but nope, we're going to cut that down too. So MF. So then we took our logo and we just started having customers going, hey, you got how are my MFers today? How are my MFers today? You'd see it in email, then you'd see it in like just conversation. And next thing you know, fast forward 5 or 6 years, 7 years, we're going to have a podcast. What are you going to call it? You're going to call it Construction MFers. So that's how it came. And we've had all kinds of fun puns with that. We have shirts that we passed out to our clients and say, I'm a real MFer with the logo, ER. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, we like it. They have fun with it.
Awesome. Well, Scott, I got to know you probably, I don't know, it's probably close to 2.5 years ago, something along those lines, where we were initially introduced. And I've always experienced you as somebody who loves to give, who loves to find ways to add value, asking nothing in return. And so with that in mind, we really do appreciate you joining. I know you have a lot going on and you have a successful podcast yourself on top of lots and lots of other things. So, I think I'll preface the conversation. We can dive right in and get you adding value to our audience here. as a part of this show. So, Stacy, I'm gonna, per usual, give you the moment here to jump off and interact with the LinkedIn Live audience, and I'll pull you back on to get some questions from the group.
Okay, sounds good.
See you in a bit.
Thanks.
So Scott, I'll tee up the topic here for first, which is we've got somebody on from a funding company that specializes in loans for construction companies, which also means that you're deep in the trenches with what construction company financials look like and what your clients look like. First, if you would just describe a little bit about your typical client type, size, just to orient our audience or where your perspective is coming from.
Okay, I'll give you the quick 1 minute version to kind of get everybody guided. So first thing, usually most lending sources or finance companies going into construction, particularly focused on subcontractors, usually are either trying to exploit them or have some negativity to them, one or the other. That doesn't mean the companies have bad intent, so to speak. It just means that the industry, for one reason or another, has looked at them upon them negatively.
Yep.
And the genesis of that typically is because lending organizations lend on credit. They lend on, okay, what's the credit worthiness? So
Yep.
If you're looking at construction, they're very credit worthy. They know what they're doing. They know how to perform, particularly construction subcontractors. But traditional credit, but defined from a lender perspective, means hard collateral. What kind of real estate? How big is your balance sheet? Et cetera, et cetera. And so those lending companies try to leverage somebody's customer, like a general contractor or the owner developer or the lien rights. So sometimes these things look that negatively. So that's one thing we overcome right out of the gate, just as mobilization funding. And one of the reasons why we try to do more activity on LinkedIn or other places to talk about who we are or who we're not, to help differentiate some of those stigmas. And as you know, we might talk about today too, there's a lot of stigmas. There's a lot of stigmas in construction, and one of them is lending and construction is one to overcome. To answer your question, who we help, what we do, we pretty much are a great lending source as a source of capital for exactly what the name of our company is, Mobilization Funding. If for a lot of the folks on your show here and listening to us today, they're very familiar with mobilization funding as part of, I have to mobilize for this job. I need cash to mobilize. I got to get my crew out there. I got to get equipment out there. I got to get a trailer. I got to order the material. I'm going to pay for labor and crews and things like that on a weekly, daily basis prior to me being able to put my first invoice in. And then after I put my first invoice in, it's going to take another 30 or 45 days to get paid. And it's that 60 to 70 days in the front of a job that is the toughest often for commercial contractors to get started. And it takes time before they start getting money off the job, but it takes even more time before they're actually cash flow positive from the job. And so cash flow positive in my world means you've collected more money than you've spent on the job.
Yep.
And so what we become is a source to lend as a lending source for that job or that customer. So think about it as you can use our money to buy material, pay for your labor, rent equipment, any project related costs that you have on that project. And then we get paid back as you're paid back. And so the beauty of our loan program is we don't need to lend the company money to use however you need or want to do. You just need the access to the cash so you can pay for your folks, so you can do the job in the most efficient manner, so you can help the project itself. And then our dollars that are spent on the project are essentially directly reimbursed to you in your schedule of values. So It's a short-term blend. So you think of us to help you as a source of cash to get from the start of the job to the point where the project's cash flow positive.
Makes sense. I got it. Thank you. I think it's a good rundown. And I think you have invested a lot more than most. I mean, if I'm being, you put your finger on the stigma, in this space, in the construction funding. So my company is a consulting firm, but it's called Well Built Construction Consulting. Well, LinkedIn algorithms have all kinds of construction funding groups thinking I am a contractor And I have gotten some of the most schlocky, just totally, predatory type messages from the lending industry. And I think the way that you've gone about doing it is more as an educator. So I want to ask this question: why did you write? You wrote a book. It's called The Big Book of Cashflow. Why did you write The Big Book of Cashflow? What motivated you to do that?
Yeah, thank you. It's so the reason I wrote the book, in short, was I've always been someone in my life that was sort of intimidated or afraid to ask questions, or hey, when I was growing up, particularly in high school and college and maybe out into the original business world, I grew up in a small town in New York, so I was not aware of so many things. I mean, I didn't even get on an airplane until I was out of college, to be candid. So my eyes opened up big when I left little New York, upstate New York, and came down into Florida for the first time. And so I was just intimidated. And I think construction, and my dad grew up in construction. He had a commercial contracting business. He was a glazer for, glass and aluminum. And so I worked in and around those sites. But what I realized is there's so many things around finance that you kind of feel stupid if you don't know. But the reality is most people don't know. And so I was one of them. And I just think that in the construction world, there's a stigma that they're bad with construction contractors are bad with money. There's a stigma that, they don't know what they're doing. And a lot of that is just untrue. And when you're in construction, a lot of folks that are in construction, they don't come from necessarily 10 or 15 years of other industries and into construction. They sort of grew up in construction. So you don't know what you don't know. And you think based on social media and all these other things that you're supposed to know this information and everyone else does and you don't. So then you don't ask. And I see that, and I saw it over the years with our clients. Once they got comfortable with us, they would ask all these questions and we would be pouring into them the basics. Like we don't just make a loan, Chad, we build an entire cash flow for our clients. Right. So they would see this information in real time to know when they're cash flow positive, where they're at. They'd ask us all the questions. When we would tell them, they would be so much more interested and engaged and then know exactly how to solve the problem. And they'd be like, oh, you know what? That's what that means. Or this is what that means. All these terms could be anything. And so what I learned was, you know what? I need to put something out there that is very simple, very easy to read, dumbs it down, take the top 20, 30 questions or 20, 30 topics that I hear about all the time inside of our business and our whole team does, and just answer them for people. And then make sure I can get the book to as many people as possible in the simplistic way. So things like, what is the difference between markup versus margin? When you add margin, how do you allocate overhead to it? What are all the things that need to be in overhead? What is fixed expenses versus variable? How is it like based on what fixed and variable are in the lender's eyes or fixed and variable in the owner's eyes? So all that stuff. And I just want to get that out there in an easy, simple 90 pages that anyone could read in a simple way. And I write like I talk. So it wasn't like this eloquent grammar. I didn't go get it edited. I just wrote it.
Yeah. Love it. That's great, man. So just out of curiosity, when did the book come out and how's it been going?
So we came out on March 21st. Mm-hmm. The book's been going great. As someone who is not an author, and I just told you why I wrote it, I picked a editor and a publisher to get the book out, which they did a great job formulating the book. But they did an awful job at explaining how do you actually need to get it out so someone can buy it. So when we originally launched the book, it was on Amazon, but you couldn't get it from Amazon for like 14 days because there's this algorithms in Amazon that if you don't fill their shelves or you don't pre-order book, they won't fill it. So it takes time. And then they're basically ordering one off at a time. I think the best thing that we did, and I basically sent out a list of books. I sent out a list on Mobilization Funding on our LinkedIn and said, hey, look, here, we're going to have this book. Here's what it's about. And a lot of people followed up in me in DMs. And so we made that book available to all those folks as quickly as possible on our own. And we either filled the orders or we just gave them to them. And so now you can get it on Amazon. I as recently as this week, I've seen they have it in stock and it's been there. But we weren't great at launching books. We were good at writing the book and the information, but we weren't good at launching the book.
Yeah, I look, man. It's when you have a simple objective like that, and you're not working some master plan to become a #1 bestseller or what have you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that sneaks up. I'm gonna have to talk to you offline. I've got a book coming out myself. Very similar kind of motivation of just like I just got to get this out there. I got to get this out there into people's hands. I could probably talk to you about some of the lessons you've learned.
Yeah, I can definitely help you with that. It's easy. You just gonna do the exact opposite I did.
Perfect.
You'd be
I
great.
look forward to it.
Yeah.
That's great. So talk a little bit about, I oftentimes say to our clients who have, a lot of them have a desire to grow, and, they're chomping at the bit to go from where they are to the next thing. And
Mhm.
I have noticed just over and over again in the construction industry that the #1 thing that'll put you under is taking on more than you can actually handle and getting yourself upside down. So I'm always against my own nature too, pumping the brake and, talking about what we need to do before we, push the pedal down all the way and grow. What are some of the, I guess, the warning signs or the indicators that a company is heading in a bad cash direction? What are some of the early signals, and maybe even some of the things that you really should be careful of if they're not taken care of, like inside your business? If you don't have X or Y or Z taken care of, you probably don't want to go too hard on growth.
Yeah. So I'll answer your question first. The short version. The short version is if you're in your business every day, regardless of the size, and you're saying things to yourself like, if I could just get all the AR I have out there, then, like I wouldn't have this problem. And you're just shoving that energy and your anger and frustration towards your customers. That's a big sign of cash flow. Now, anyone listening to this would be like, yeah, no, of course, genius, no doubt. Right. But what I mean by that is if there's something wrong, like the construction industry cash flow wise is very structured. It is tried and true. It's been a certain way for a long period of time, right? So the more work you do in the construction industry, if you're in that spot, you have to find a way to cure that, or
Right.
you're just going to always be in it. So knowing that up front, that's the first thing. If you're constantly spending a lot of your week chasing down the next payment, getting paid, how do I get paid? How do I get that money coming in? That's also an issue. And so those are the first two telltale signs. And if you just have this angst and fear and you're constantly in the weeds of money versus trying to get on top of the project and thinking like, how can I do this the most efficient way? What's the right way to go about it, et cetera, that's a pure sign of cash flow. That's the feeling you should have. That's the feel. Those are the things you should feel and see. Now, if you're actually able to get out of that anxiety and actually look at it, where is the issues lie? It really comes down to your financials and planning. Here's the good news. The good news is my experience, like 90+% of commercial contractors, when you give them the information they need to see, they know exactly what to do and how to fix the problem. The problem, and this is the bad news, is they don't have the information in front of them that they need to see. And so one of the things we realized really quickly in mobilization funding is we needed to help them do that for two reasons. One, it helps us try to figure out what they need, how much they need, when they need it, to do it in an effective way. But it also can add so much value to them in the way they can live their life and be at peace in this industry and execute projects, which is really what they want to do. And so you have to have a great I call it financial infrastructure. You have to build that. How am I going to account for my dollars? When am I going to recognize revenue? Am I going to run cash books or accrual books? How do I budget now against that? What are the real costs of my project? And I think there's two things, I talk about this a lot. There's really two things that commercial contractors do very well, or they have a very good system for. The first is they all know how to bid. They have a way they like to bid. Now, I'm not saying everybody's great at bidding or estimating, but they have a system and a method for which they go about figuring out what a job's going to cost and allocating their overhead and profit to it. Now, it doesn't mean they do it correctly or do it right or wrong or there's not better ways. It just, they have a system for it. The second thing they know well is what's the work schedule I'm going to do? Is this going to be a 4-month project, a 6-month project? Can I knock this out in 2 weeks or 4 weeks? And that's important because you want to know how many billing cycles you're going to have, therefore figure it out. So you have those two things. The third thing, which I think is the most important, this is what's missing. And it is, of the cost that I've now estimated I need to spend on this project against the amount of time I'm going to be on the project, how much of that actual money do I need to put out on the job before I can count on it coming from the job?
Yeah.
And so, short example, $500,000 project. You have $400,000 of cost. You have a nice 20% margin. You're going to make $100,000. Do you need to spend all $400,000 before you receive any money on that job? Or do you need to spend all $400,000 before you're even cash flow positive? Those are the two key things you need to know. And why that you need to know that is because if you are going to have to spend the entire $400,000 before you're cash flow positive, that means you cannot take one nickel off of that job and use it for anything other than that job.
Right.
That's the piece that you need to know. That means, again, if you're not cash flow positive on that job, you cannot use any of those dollars to spend on insurance payments, overhead, anything other than labor for that project and material for that project or expenses, because otherwise you're going to need to take that money from somewhere else. And that's what gets contractors in trouble is you go into it thinking you can run it with $100,000 out of pocket and it turns into 300. Now that 200 is coming from somewhere else and you get stuck. And so that's what that cash flow tool that we created, that we used to, candidly, we created it in the beginning just so we could see how the cash flow of a job goes from a lender perspective. How much do we lend? When is it going to be? What's their margin? Well, the reason we share it with everyone is we realized it was such a powerful tool for them to be able to see and touch and feel that once they had the information, very often, sometimes customers didn't even need us, or they only needed like half of what they thought they needed to get the job going. And sometimes they needed 10 times the amount. But once they do and they know where the pain points are, they can go to their supplier. They can go to a different supplier. They can work terms with people. They know what to do. It's going into a job thinking you're only going to spend $100,000, but you have to spend 300. Those are the ones that kill you.
Makes total sense. And yeah, I see a lot of trade contractors attempt to front load their schedule of values with the intent of getting cash flow positive as quickly as possible. And a construction community or an owner and general contractor community that sometimes push back on that. Is that what do you see there?
Yeah, I mean, so let's just look at it by nature. You have a general contractor owner and a subcontractor. Subcontractor wants to get as much of that money off the job as fast as possible and get ahead for obvious reasons. The general contractor or the owner, it's really the owner to the general contractor.
The general contractor has a responsibility to protect the owner, so they're representing that owner, and so that's where the pushback can come in. But yeah, sorry, keep going.
Yep. And so what happens is the general contractor owner, they want to get as much work complete without paying for it as they can. It's just leverage. And so you have this constant back and forth that you have to play between. And that's the piece that I think is so important to understand is if you just go out and talk about it, or you can show your numbers or show your intent or show what you're doing versus try to finagle, I think sometimes that's a lot better route to go. Now, I've had clients say, yeah, if I do that, then they just won't do it. I'm like, well, maybe those are the folks that you don't work for. You work for someone else. It's also the reason why we talk so hard about performance is key. If you're undeniably great at what you do, regardless of the size of your business, just get great at whatever it is you do and get great at whatever size project you do. And just realize you're probably going to be in this for 10, 20 years, and don't try to get to where you want to be in year 10, in year 2. You can just continue to have a good structure, build a good balance sheet, and then you start to command what you want. For example, we have contractors that are working for some of the largest general contractors on the earth, okay? Working for the best developers on the earth. For example, like people have heard of the Related Group, right? They do projects all over the place. They're going to be great in any time of, any economic time. And so, there's those contractors with $8, $9, $10 million construction contract or subcontracts. They're negotiating terms. Like, don't think they're not getting mobilization funding money up front. So if you're a contractor thinking, oh, that big job, if I'm going to work for them, I just got to take whatever they get. No, they're not giving. They're giving contracts to the people that are redlining their contract. They're giving contracts to the people that are telling them what they need to execute because they know that they will execute. They care about performance more. So those are the things, back to the original question you had too. If you're thinking you have to bend the knee on things that are good for your business just to take the project, that's also a sign of a little bit of desperation and that you're probably in a cash flow pinch and you don't want to just take on any job. You need jobs that you can do for your company.
Yeah, I think that's there's always this analogy that I talk about where it's like, when you're starving, it makes sense to eat anything to survive, right? But survival mode should be a very, very short-lived experience and something that you kind of, push through, learn from, and prevent moving forward. So how did you get there in the first place, and how do we make sure we're not there again? But no doubt, I think more money has been lost by convincing yourself to take a deal than it has to been lost by losing a deal. I think that's.
Hey, by the way, I learned that in the lending business. Same thing. You take the wrong loan, you do the wrong thing. You couldn't early on. That's how we learned the lessons. We lent into a project that a contractor shouldn't be doing, and if they shouldn't be doing it, it's not good for us.
We shouldn't be doing
it. On it. Candidly, it works for them too. If we can't make a loan to that project for whatever reason, it's not a project they should be doing either.
Yeah,
because something doesn't work.
That's a good indicator. Agreed. I want to bring back Stacy here. We're getting close to the wrap up. Stacy, here we go. Stacy, what kind of questions we got? Uh-oh. Oh. You're on mute or something, Stace. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Okay. So in your book, you talk about cash flow tips, negotiating terms, getting paid on time, building an emergency fund. I think you already talked about schedule, internal team, getting them in line. Can you speak on some of those tips?
Yeah. So the emergency fund, that'd be great. And now listen, if I was listening to this, yeah, it'd be great to have an emergency fund, but what if I never have any extra cash flow? So, where you come up with the emergency fund is starting at the beginning. If you have good financial infrastructure, again, what we talked about with Chad, how money comes in, how money comes out, how you're going to allocate profits, what types of projects you're going to take at what type of margin, you'll eventually finish projects, get paid, have extra earnings. And instead of pulling that money out to either buy a piece of equipment or do something else, you want to start to build a little bit of an emergency fund. Emergency fund means it's a cushion that allows you to take extra risk or manage extra risk in the scenario where you get halfway out on a project and maybe there's a design flaw and the project gets stopped for engineering redesign, things that are out of your control, but you're still going to have labor. You need to pay your guys. You need to pay your people. You need to you just bought a bunch of equipment, you just bought a bunch of material for that job, but they're not going to pay you yet because there's a freeze on the job, right? So things like that, you'd build that emergency fund. Speaking to your team, I think one of the most important things in any company, and it doesn't matter whether you're in construction or not, it just definitely applies to construction, is you got to have a culture of a team, that you really need a team atmosphere to be successful. And I think it's difficult because not only do you have to be your own team and what you're going to do, but you're on a construction site with a team made up of people that are from different companies and different contractors. So there's a team and a team. And what culture are you bringing to the site is going to permeate throughout the others. And if you can keep your folks in a really tight spot and everybody knows what they're doing and how they're doing it and why, it'll really help you financially.
That's good. You also talked about different tools to manage flows. I think you said you created your own. How can we show our audience, or where can they go to experiment with these tools or get some?
Yeah. So the project Cashflow tool is on our website on the resources page. It's an Excel file that we built. It has an entire instructional guide. It can be downloaded right to your computer. You don't have to give us your email. You don't have to do anything fancy. You can download it right there and get anything you want. We also built a cash flow tool that if you're not super savvy with Excel and for whatever reason you don't like the directions and it's not good, you can also tab through on our site on the same cash flow page, whether you work under purchase orders or contracts, and you can actually answer questions. You can just tab through and answer questions, and then we'll build the sheet for you and email it to you. And so there's two ways to access that tool. And what that tool can give you is how many weeks am I going to be on this job? How much money do I need to put into it? When do I turn cash flow positive? Et cetera, et cetera. So like a typical example, I go back to that $500,000 job with $100,000 loan. You might only need 20 grand a week for 5 weeks to make payroll. The rest of it's smooth based on how you're going to invoice it. You know, you're cash flow positive week 10. That's what that information will tell you.
Yeah. All very helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
Did
awesome.
you have any other questions?
Yeah, I do. We got a comment about the about overbillings, and I thought, man, the comment was overbillings are dangerous. There's no cash flow left for the end of the job, and then a thumbs down emoji, which I thought was on point. And I wonder your perspective, Scott, on overbilling, underbilling, perfect billing. What's the best approach if you're a contractor watching this? And because I've heard it, man, I'm telling you, I got clients who are like, that project's overbilled. We're doing great. This one's overbilled. This one's overbilled. This. It's like, I don't know if that's great. That creates other issues.
Yeah. So my opinion on that is I go back to like, why does someone overbill? But you only overbill because you need cash to execute, because you're going to be running underwater for a certain period of time. And so the only solution, if you're the old adage, if you have a hammer, everything's a nail, right? Well, if your only option you think you have is to get money off of a project in order to execute it, then you want to try to get as much money off the project as you possibly can.
Right.
Overbilling by definition is you've collected more than someone has determined you've completed. Now, if someone overbilled, for example, a contractor overbilled, and maybe they got 10% overbillings, but all that overbillings is sitting in this emergency fund to pay for the materials for the project, and they could show exactly how it's used, someone might not be so upset with that, right? But it's the assumption that overbilling occurred so that you can just cash flow your business and your company. That's different. So for example, when we make a loan, we might put $200,000 out on $1 million project, all into the project. It's labor, it's equipment, it's material, and there's no money that's come off the job yet. So now in a perfect world, the general contractor owner might say, well, that's awesome that a contractor's invested that much dollars into it. But from the contractor's perspective, they're like, I'm underbilled. Or we call it something else. I'm under whatever, but I've got all these dollars out. So I think underbilled, overbilled has some negative connotations for obvious reasons, which is why I always say, you know what, why not just have a very honest conversation? Like, here's how much money I've invested. This is what it is. By the way, this is how much I'm going to make on this job if I do it. And I need that much money to make because I'm going to invest X amount of dollars into this project before I even start. So I'm not suggesting you go tell everybody what your profit is, but I do think you could say, here's what I need for this job for me to be successful. But the thing is, when you do that, you got to be successful. You got to perform. You can't just not perform. You can't just take the money and go use it somewhere else or whatnot.
Yeah. At the end of the day, some of my biggest takeaways, and it's really interesting, man. It's like almost no matter what walk of life somebody is coming from, or what background somebody has when they're a guest on our show, I bet you 30 out of our 54 now shows, or 53 shows, the message has come down to communicate, be transparent, be honest, and just kind of doing the right thing type of stuff. There's no substitute for operating in a transparent, ethical way, and I appreciate you echoing that from your seat.
Yeah, I think if you talk to a general contractor and you tell them and show them how much labor you have out on the job and what you've paid so far, and you show what equipment you've ordered or material you leased, and they can see it. And you're like, look, here's the real money. I got $225,000 of sunk cost out here and I haven't been paid yet. This is why it's tough. Here's what I need. This is why I'm asking for this. That's an entirely different conversation than pay me. I invoiced you, pay me,
Totally. And that it's when you're combative, don't be surprised if you're met with that same kind of posture. And by the way, whose contract is going to win?
And look, you made a great point there. Two things too. And if you're a general contractor, let's not pretend that we don't all know that's what's happening either. Right. So like, be open to share that conversation. Like, it's maybe just realize a subcontractor might not bring that to the table, and you might not be able to pay them early, but you could definitely solicit the conversation. Hey, what do you need? How can I help you? I know you probably got a lot of money out here. How much is it? What can I do? Is there anything? And then at the end of the day, and Stacy, this came up with in the event we did for change orders with Metro DC, right? And Ike's group. When you do sign a contract though, own it. Like, you signed it, you've agreed to those terms. Like, don't sign a contract and then turn around and want to be paid in 15 days and you're not getting paid for 30. Now, if you're supposed to be paid in 30 and it's now 50, sure, let loose. But if you sign it, you sign it, and that's part of the deal. You got to negotiate things that you're going to need, and you need to know what things you need to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, it's when people don't know what context is behind the behavior, unfortunately, they assume the worst. So if somebody feels like you're trying to sneak one past them, just consider how the behavior might be perceived by others. And instead of just doing the behavior, maybe go to them and talk about what's going on before you do the behavior. Right.
That's right. I think you touched on something.
Fill in the blank with billing. I can fill in the blank with building something. I can fill in the blank with change orders. I can, there's a long list there.
Yeah. Humans are most nervous about the unknown. So if you're asking for something and you're not giving the reason, or it's unclear, that unknown, that just the most important thing to take away is that unknown is getting filled with an answer. Right. It's just an answer that you're not giving. Somebody's filling it. They're asking me. Chad's asking me for money early because he must be broke.
Yep.
No, well, Chad's asking me early for money because he's got 6 jobs all started at once. He's putting pipe in the ground. Ferguson's supply house isn't giving him any more until he makes a payment, and he needs to make a payment. Doesn't mean he's broke. Doesn't mean he doesn't have a job. It just means he's killing it, and he needs to get some supplier credit. That's all it means.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, awesome. All right, good. Stacy, anything else from you?
Nope, we're covered. But
Scott, is there anything we haven't talked about that you're dying to say?
No, I mean, I got all kinds of things to say, but nothing I'm dying to say. I think you did a great job. I just really appreciate you guys. One, the commitment you're making to your show and getting this information out there and having people on it, because the most important thing the construction industry needs to do to fix all the things we talked about is change the stories that are being told. Not only the ones that are being told about the construction industry from the outside, but the ones that we've been touched on a little bit here that are being told to each other inside. And it's only through doing things like this that you can get folks that touch the construction industry from a third party perspective, as a marketer, as a consultant, or as a lender, that can say, hey, look, you guys are all really cool people. You all have this great intent. It's not the way people talk about. So let's talk about it in other ways. I think that's important. And so I want to thank you guys for doing that. And I appreciate you taking time to have me on your show.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Scott. That's awesome, man. Appreciate you. Keep doing what you do. We'll keep doing what we do, and we'll keep hanging out.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt. And don't forget to reach out. I'll tell you all about the mistakes we made on the book, and hopefully I can point you at least in the right direction.
I will do. Do it. Yeah. Yeah. All right, cool. Scott, thank you so much. Stacy, I think we have a little bit of housekeeping to cover here before we call it a day. So that was a lot of fun. Love talking to Scott. He's in the conversation leading up to this show, on my team, somebody on our team joined to help kind of like take the notes and organize the conversation. And she texted me afterward and she said, I think we might have found your twin in Florida. And I was like, oh man, except I have I'm probably more inappropriate from time to time. Though the MFer sign, the guy might have me. I don't know. It was funny.
Could be.
I thought we definitely have we
We'll
could
just
talk.
have to go to Florida and have some drinks with them and figure out
That'd be a
how
good time.
crazy he is.
So join us at the same time next week. We've got episode 54 with Stepan Mikulich. Yes, Stepan Mikulich. That's right. I practiced that yesterday.
I am so glad you did the prep call with him because after that, yeah.
He is awesome. You're going to love this guy. Young guy, super passionate about the role that artificial intelligence is currently playing and going to play in the construction industry. He'll help us cut through a lot of the, noise and surface a handful of things that are really immediately viable and that you should be doing right now to create better quality products, to create higher levels of efficiency, and throw some dollars to the bottom line. So that is going to be a really interesting conversation. Look forward to having next week. As always, email us to be added to our weekly mailing list. Stacy H at steeltoecom.com. She'll get you hooked up. That way you don't have to wonder when and how to register. You'll get an email every week that's pretty simple about a recap from the last week's show and how to register for the upcoming week's show. I think that covers it. Stacy, anything else?
Nope, that covers it.
Enjoy that beach.
Thank you. I'll see you guys all next week.
Appreciate the turtle and the bird for joining us. All right.
Have a good one.
See ya. You too. Bye-bye.